and say, you know, as such, the main purpose of this trial is to establish preliminary efficacy. You know, or this is a phase 1/2 randomized clinical trial. And the reason why we are calling it a phase 1/2 is because we are going to still look at toxicity profiles. We're going to test 2 or 3 different doses in this, probably 2 doses, maybe. You wouldn't want to do lots of doses. In that case, you wouldn't be doing the step like 3 + 3 + 3 + 3. You would probably be doing dose 1 versus dose 2 versus control. And so you're trying to refine which one of these 2 doses is the best tolerability and the best effect to pick going forward for the future definitive trial. And we're not really going to compare them to each other. You have to lay that out very clearly. That your purpose is to take these 2 things, look at toxicity, and look at the effect size compared to this, the control, right? And so, yes, painstakingly you have to lay this stuff out. Because you're going to realize that just like we don't all know what all this is in a room, just because someone's reviewing your grant doesn't mean they know it either. And sometimes you're educating, you are always educating when you're writing a grant to your reviewers. And references. How do I know that this is how to define the right effect size? How do I know this is a minimally clinically important change? Why am I calling it a phase 2? Reference. Right?
I was just going to say, I think it's a really great question and great feedback too, because, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but in ASSIST, you have to identify, so the submission, you know, working with Verna, et cetera, I think that you have to identify whether it's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and you can't pick one or the other or a few of them. So if you pick a phase 2 and then having something that's in the grant that then explicitly says it is a phase 2 because of, or it's a phase 1/phase 2.
Well, it's almost
If it's a phase 1/phase 2, and we have to pick whether or not it's a phase 2 trial.
Right.
If it's a phase 1, phase 2, we pick, in the forms, we pick a phase 2.
Phase 2 and then describe, like you're saying, in the grant. Okay. That's why I say it's a good question.
Yeah, it's just, I think the challenge is reviewers want more than, you know, I mean, you know what you're kind of thinking of. It's just, you know, like, they want a power analysis and they want analyses, and, you know, it's jumping the gun of where you are, and so I think it's...
So you're right, so there would be no power analysis for a phase 1. If it's just a single phase 1, there is no power analysis, and you reference that from your methodology references. If it is a phase 2, you're right, they want you to talk about power. However, they cannot hang you for having 80% power, and they also can't hang you because you don't have an effect size that you know of to calculate that. If you knew the effect size and you knew how to calculate it, there's no need to be doing a phase 2. You would be moving to a phase 3. So what we do in those grants that are focusing on phase 2s, which are K award research projects, R21 research projects, some other types of grant mechanisms, we sit and we create a little table that says, you know, we're going to recruit, you know, 100 people to this trial. We expect that we will have 80 fully evaluable patients because in general we have 20% that don't provide us all the data based on withdrawals and things like that. And then what we say is with 80% power, we have the ability to, with our 2 groups or whatever you're going to do, we have the ability to detect depends on whether you're going to use effect size or minimum difference on your scale, right? So we have an ability to detect a, you know, moderate effect size of 0.4, right? Whatever your number is. I mean, you have to do your calculations with your, you know, your numbers to see what your true power would be. So we drop that down, and then we say, and if the effect size is larger, you know, it's not bigger than 0.3, it's 0.4, 0.5. We show that table in the grant. Then, you know, we have like 95% power to detect it if it's like a 0.6 or whatever the number would be. And then the next step is we come back and we say, and we're happy with this power because if it is at least a 0.3 effect size on this trial, that means a change of 5 points or 3 points or whatever amount of points it is on, we use a lot of patient-reported outcomes, or change of VO2 max or whatever. It means this much change, real change in this measure, and that much real change in that measure is clinically relevant and important for this population. So for me, if I'm going to have fatigue as my primary outcome and it's a patient-reported measure, and I look at my measure and it's established that a 5-point change in the multidimensional fatigue symptom inventory is clinically meaningful to patients because they've told me that's a real difference in my life, that's how I do it in a phase 2. So I'm not actually powering it the way you would write traditional power calculations that were taught in school, right, in our academic classes. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So phase 3, as I mentioned, that's definitive, okay? You still can have usual care or standard care. You can create a control condition, but in the phase 3, you come in and you say, I have an intervention. My prior data shows I have this effect size. And if I have this effect size, it's working. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the power and the probability of being able to show that this really is a real effect, right? And I want to do everything so I take out my type 1, type 2 error, and basically if I can repeat this and show the same effect within this wiggle room, then I'm going to believe that the results I got before are true, okay? That means you calculate your power and you're held to it to report that trial. It means you calculate the power on the one and only primary outcome. And guess what? Here's this one, some kicks the bucket sometimes. I had this happen to me in one of my trials. You picked your primary outcome measure, your fatigue measure, and you picked it based on your data, and you're like, this is the most sensitive one, this is the one that's going to nail it. I feel pretty confident. It's all out there in the literature. This is the one. And then you put a different one also in there because one of them is unidimensional and one of them is multidimensional, and you're thinking, I want all these different aspects of fatigue to look at. And lo and behold, you get done at the end of your exercise trial and you calculate the one you wrote in your grant, and it did not cut the bar. It did not make the bar. But this other one made the bar. Guess what you cannot do? Sorry. You don't get to publish that your intervention worked. And that this is something that we get to put out there and say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that cancer patients need to do this. You have to go back, do another trial all the way over again, definitive, with a different measure, to really say that we believe this beyond a shadow of a doubt, this works. Okay? So phase 3 is about putting the pedal to the metal. You set the parameters, you don't get to deviate from it at all. Okay? And I really would encourage you, and I'm not going to give you a reference because if you go find Design of Randomized Clinical Trials book, you can search it on Amazon, you can have it on in your office tomorrow. It really isn't going to matter which one you get. A lot of them are going to talk about how it works for drugs and FDA trials and FDA approval trials, but you will get the basics of all of this holds true for whether you're doing behavior or a nutraceutical or a pharmaceutical, it doesn't matter. A lot of the bullet points are the same and they're important, okay?
So Karen, in those situations where you have let's call it a null finding, which really it's not. I mean, you have a change, but it's not the one that you indicated as the primary outcome. You can still publish those results, but how do you frame it then?
Well, lots of different ways. It depends on what you want to do. First of all, you have to come right out and say, we didn't find our primary outcome. And you'll get hammered in the top tier journals if you don't own up to it. But if you have super robust findings on 2 of your named secondary outcomes, you can sometimes put those things together in one paper and it goes really well, right? So one of the papers I'm working on now is, we missed our primary outcome, but we didn't hit total fatigue, but we hit mental fatigue and we hit cognitive impairment. And guess what? We did it with a lot less dose of actual activity that they took on and did. And if this is the case, one thing we've learned is that, hey, you have to get a higher dose to hit overall fatigue. You're never going to hit the functional domains if you don't get here. but you can hit the cognitive domains of fatigue even here, right? So you're right, you learn things. It's about how you write it up. Are you gonna always land that in New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA or JCO or something like that? That gets more difficult. But along the way, I mean, a lot of us have a lot of medium tier journal publications. And let's face it, your first original data, I never got a high tier publication the first probably 8 years of my career because I was doing all these little studies. But if you really want to do original work, and you're not just publishing off of someone else's data that they've spent decades of their life collecting, right? I love it when I see postdocs and people who end up with a JAMA article because they went to study under somebody at a big institution who has super data sets, and so they're publishing off that data set. And then when they go land a faculty position after their postdoc, they still don't know how to collect their own data, right? They're still struggling to collect their own data. Great, they could write and they publish this other person's data, but they still go, no, I'm not going to get this in JAMA. I have to design the perfect study. It's not going to work that way.
I'll just say, the scenario you're describing happened to us in our most recent clinical trial. And we published in a top tier journal. We acknowledged, just like you said, we owned up to the fact that we didn't hit our primary outcome. But we did hit some secondary outcomes.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe we had gone too far in terms of explaining away why we didn't find the primary outcome, but we didn't get much pushback from the journal. They looked at, we had some response bias, we had some issues with prevalence of certain behaviors and that lowered our power. It went well. It's a nice article.
That's great to hear.
And we learned a lot from it.
And so that's the whole other art of publishing, which is a whole other workshop, right? But yes, you can miss it and still get it published.
Can I ask another question, Karen?
Yes.
Where in the process are you publishing the side effects? So if you find negative side effects, are you publishing those mostly at the end of your phase 1 or at the end of phase 2?
No, we publish all along the way. So if we do a phase 1, we want to publish it. If we do a phase 2, but those phase 1s and phase 2s go in, I hate to call them lower tier journals, but they don't have the same, index rating. But at the same time, we publish them, but they generally tend to be in what we call medium tier journals, or journals that are able to take a lot more articles than like a JAMA or something like that. We have a lot of what I call middle, very reputable cancer journals that are able to publish things that the other big-time journals just don't have the page bandwidth to be able to take. So we publish them all. But for example, we would put like a phase 1 study. I would tell a mentee to send it to the MASC journal, which is a journal of supportive care in cancer. We have a journal of there's a bunch of little ones like that I call them little, but they're not little. They're really big. They publish a lot, sometimes more articles than the big ones. It's just they publish a different type. So they're really willing to take those early seed findings and publish them versus what the big league ones want to publish. And that's another thing about, it's like a grant, and this is going to lead me into, once you figure out your phase of your trial, then you want to start looking for the right RFAs and the right mechanisms to support your idea and your phase. And that's where you get into, am I looking for an R03 or R21, an R, what are the new ones now, which are the R21, R33s that are like these progressive clinical trial ones where you do like the introductory part and then you go to the later phase 1 as part of it. So you want to look at your data, look at where you are in terms of the knowledge that you're trying to convey in your trial. And once you have a sense of that, before you start writing, before you go too much further, you want to go look at your RFA, okay? And look up for an RFA. For those that you don't know, is a request for it's a request for RFP, request for proposals, and a PA, which is a program announcement. So what I mean by that is go to your funding agencies and start looking for the calls, the information that tells you these are the kinds of grants and the grant mechanisms that we want to fund. and look broadly. Don't just look at NCI or NIH, look at all kinds of funding agencies out there. Look at PCORI, look at the American Cancer Society, look at the Department of Defense funds a whole lot of research that people won't necessarily think about, right? What are some other agencies that you guys would be looking at that I don't necessarily know about, like nutrition or FDA, National Science Foundation,
We're gonna throw out AICR for.
AICR,
For cancer, yeah.
yeah, Coleman Foundation, Avon. So this is where your Office of Research at the university comes in. So you want to, what's your name again?
Lisa.
Lisa, you want to go over here and have a conversation with Lisa and say, Lisa, here's my idea and here's the things I'm looking at. Can you guys search and help me find potential funders?
That would be Aubrey and Julie in our office. They are proposal folks, they are awesome, they are great. But yes, our office, and you can come to any of us and we'll help direct you to where you need to go.
That's good. All right. So I'm going to pick up, yes.
Are you going to talk about clinicaltrials.gov and how that conveyance venue is important in design, dissemination, things like that? Or do you not, is that not a factor in your overall?
So
scaffolding?
clinicaltrials.gov is a whole other question. Those of us that do clinical trials, we have painful experiences with clinicaltrials.gov. Though I'm not going to go into detail about that because you don't have to worry about clinicaltrials.gov until after you get a grant in a project, okay? And a lot of projects are not required to be on clinicaltrials.gov. And as much as I love dissemination, I will tell you, if you do not have to put something on clinicaltrials.gov, if you are not absolutely required to do it by the government, do not. I made the mistake early on of saying, oh, I'll put my trial up there, and I have regretted every one I did that I did not have to do. And it's getting worse. The red tape is getting worse, okay? So there are certain trials you are required to put up there, and if you are not required to put it up there, my advice to you, which isn't popular among everybody, is do not do it. You'll know if you have to, because if you get a NIH funded grant and you have to, they will harp on you if it's not done. So you will know if you have to.
If you do get a notice that you need to come work with us, or we'll try to help you because, but if you do get a notice that you need to, because they're starting to find institutions and investigators that don't.
Yes. So let's not go there because that is a whole other nightmare. All right?
Can I just ask one more question about it?
Yep.
So how do you traverse the line though about some journal articles need to have that clinicaltrials.gov registration, even if it's not an NIH funded trial,
So if you do have to think ahead of time, you know, is this a journal is this a study I'm gonna wanna try to submit to JCO? If it is, yes. However, the majority of your pilot funds that you guys are doing your first randomized clinical trials with here at the university, you're not gonna submit to JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine or JCO. They will turn it back to you with an editor's rejection. And you don't want to worry about putting that on clinicaltrials.gov. And most of the medium tier journals do not require that. They do not, at least in my world. And so there's a lot of journals that are not asking for that clinicaltrials.gov number. And so, yeah, you do have to think about options and you have to think about where you're going to eventually want to publish this. But we do register some of our phase 2s, but smaller pilots, not necessarily, because it's not required. So I don't want to derail this into a clinical trials conversation because it's about grant writing, and we could talk about that all day. It's its own beast. Yeah. But you do want to think about it. Once you get this funded, then have a discussion with your institutional representatives about it, would be my advice. So the other thing I want to tell you, in addition to going and looking for your RFAs or your RFPs or program announcements, because that's going to help you understand the pieces and the ways to think about this, all right? How many of you know what I'm talking about? How many of you have ever gone and actually looked for a funding announcement? Yeah, so when you get the funding announcement, you know you have these ideas and you've been working on them so long, you start reading all this stuff from the funding announcement and you're like, I don't have that. I don't have that. Oh, what do you mean I have to do that? So when you're designing these pilots right now, even though you may not apply for one of these for 2 years, I would suggest you go look at a couple and get a couple and print them and read them and look at them on your desk. That's one of the first things we tell people to do, and they aren't going to write that grant for 18 to 24 months when they walk in my door, but we do a whole thing where they go and look at it, all right? The other thing I will tell you that I have all of my folks do is look at the NIH website and all the NIH workshops. Where you live, you're in drivable distance to DC, and right now everything is virtual. NIH hosts all kinds of free workshops. Government paid for, you register for it. There's everything under the sun, all right, that they are looking at that you can find. You want to know how to do something with a behavioral trial, you want to learn about a network. You may look at something and think, I don't really do that, it's not super relevant to me, but the more of those kinds of workshops and opportunities you can get in, especially right now in the virtual environment where you don't even have to leave, you can just go online and watch it. And it's really cool because I go online and watch a lot of them and I'm sitting in my office and I'm working at the same time. I'm answering an email, I'm listening to the presenter. It's a great way to get knowledge that you wouldn't be able to have access to otherwise. And a lot of the people that are doing these workshops are your program officers. They're your people that you're going to work with when you do eventually submit a grant, okay? And so it's very important to take advantage of those workshops. The other thing is, once you think you have a grant mechanism that you're going to submit to, and you've got a pretty good idea going, right? Maybe even have a rough draft of your specific aims page. Then I want you to do 2 other things. I want you to start looking at the review committees at NIH. And I want you to start looking at the review committees at NIH and try to figure out which one you think your work is going to eventually go to, because you're going to have to name that when you submit a grant. Which review committee do you think it fits? You may not always get the one that you asked for, and we write it all in the cover letter in detail. We think it belongs in this review group, and blah, blah, blah. And hopefully you can get this to where you're going to have the best expertise to review your work, that's the most qualified to review your work, because you don't want people reviewing your work that aren't qualified to review your work, okay? There's another sort of inside secret when you look at these review rosters, so you can look up people, and maybe you don't know them, and you see they're all public, they're all Googleable, there's just not any like secret information, they're all 100% public. You look up the rosters, and you're like, oh, I think it might fit with this MESH review panel. And I look on the MESH review panel, and I look at the last few rosters, and I go, oh, Dr. Mushin's on that panel, and you know, that's awesome. That means that I got a really good exercise person on there that might understand how to review my grant. So yeah, MESH might be a really good place to send my project, okay? Or any of the others. There's like a bunch of them, and you need to learn about these review panels and look at the rosters so you understand how people that are there to help you. If you don't know them, look them up. Google is an amazing thing. I look at review rosters now, and I don't know, 80% of the people on my committee, but I look them all up. And the other thing, and why that's important, is if I look them all up, and there is no exercise scientist, there is nobody with a background in yoga or exercise oncology, when I write my cover letter for my submission, I write in there to the SRO who's going to be receiving this, I need special expertise on this panel in this. For me, I needed an NCORE multi-center clinical trials, I needed an exercise oncology, and I needed in yoga on this project. You write it in, because then they're obligated to go get an ad hoc reviewer that knows what you're talking about, that knows your field, okay? So this is all strategies that are really important before you're ever putting pen to paper, okay? The other thing I want you to do is for that RFP or whatever you're responding to, at the end of it, there's always a person that says, for questions, reach out to these people, right? And they're usually the program officer that's responsible for shepherding that portfolio of research at NIH. I want you to email them, and I want you to introduce yourself, and I want you to ask them to take time to have a call with you and talk to you. And I want you to develop a real tried and true relationship with them. Don't let this be a person that sits in some office in DC that you never get to know. And guess what? If you're going up to DC on the weekend to visit with your friends, and you can leave Greensboro on Friday morning, and your PO is there, you say, hey, 2 weeks ahead of time, can I make an appointment to stop in and say hello to you? I'm working on my project, I have a few ideas I want to run by you, I'd love to meet you in person, get to know you a little better, I'll come to your office if you can give me 45 minutes of your time. Most of them will. And people feel like these program officers are like people who are untouchable that you can't really talk to. I know every single one of my program officers. I know them well. Most of them I've worked with for almost the full 18 years that I've been there. I've had a few changeovers doing what I'm doing. But I have such a good relationship with my program officers, I have their cell phones in my pocket. So I'm going to work on a new R01. I can pick up the phone. I can call Marge and say, look, I got 2 mentees with this idea. I'm thinking this program announcement. What are you thinking? And she'll be like, well, this is the one I love. She goes, well, you know, just wait 2 weeks. Because you're going to get one from me that's coming out. It's going to be better than that one. And I'm like, okay, great, we'll wait 2 weeks. And so little things like that they can tell you. There's things they can't tell you. But then sometimes what they can do is they talk to you. And they talk all around it without breaking any confidence. And if you're smart and you can read between the lines, you're going to come away with things that are going to exponentially help you design your project, write your grant, write your resubmission, all of that. Program officers are your best friends. Some of them are better than others. They're all human beings. So take that with a grain of salt. But if you can get your program officer to like you, to want to help you, to want to give you information and keep you abreast. They send me emails all the time, everything coming out. I get all kinds of stuff from my program officers. Really important to make friends with them.
Karen, I completely agree with what you just said, but I was listening to some of the reactions, so I think, thinking about the new faculty that you work with, the people who don't have an established history of funding, and they've experienced the not getting a call back, what have you found have been good strategies for them at their level to break through to begin to establish that relationship when you don't have a cell phone in the pocket yet?
You have program officers you work with, right? Your senior faculty do. Yes,
Yes.
that's your job. My job, when I'm a junior person, I don't send them cold to just any old program officer, right? So I will send them to Ann or to Diane or to Marge, depending on where they're going and what they're doing, and I will say, you know, you need to introduce yourself. Hi, I'm a new research assistant professor working on this project with Dr. Mushin. I'm designing my thing. She mentioned that I might want to reach out, introduce myself to you, okay? The other part that's nice is, and this is something the Women's Center can do, is you need to reach out to people, to program officers and people, and have them do a little presentation for you guys here where the officers come and they talk about all the funding options in the portfolio. You can do this virtually right now, okay? Really easy. They don't even have to travel. You can put something together. And then guess what? All you guys show up and you meet all these people. I bring them to Rochester. It's free. I can't pay for them to come. The government pays for them to come. I bring them to Rochester. I have all my program officers sitting in Rochester at least once a year, if not twice. And all my people, like, could you imagine the person who's going to help shepherd your grant sitting right there at that table across from you today? You had a bagel with them. You ate coffee, you drank coffee with them. Big difference, right? So the institution, that's something the institution can do to support you, and do it virtually. Start setting it up virtually right now. So I do the intros in the beginning. I give the first entree so it's not they don't fall flat. I make sure they don't fall flat on the first time because it's intimidating and it's hard. All right, so Next thing is, if you have your collaborators within the university, I'm telling you the order in which I do all of this for projects, if you haven't figured that out yet. The next thing is consultants. Are you going to need expertise from a different university that work on your project? So if so, the answer is yes, a lot of times these days, okay, almost all the time. So you get that, you find that person and you get them involved right away, early on. And you make them a real part of your team, like we were talking about making the oncologist a real part of the team at the networking lunch yesterday. Okay? This isn't just, hey, we want to come in your clinic when I'm going to write this great grant because I'm, better than sliced bread, and you're going to put people on my study, but really bring that consultant in for whatever, and get them on board, and get them bought in, and get them involved. A lot of times people will offer to be consultants. You don't have to pay them thousands and thousands of dollars because they like you, they like your idea, and they want to give back, right, the way people gave them. However, the best use of any institutional funds, aside from paying for analyses or other things like that on your trial that you'll ever make, is if you actually have a consultant that you want to help you write a grant, and you can muster together $1,000 to pay them to do all that reading of your grant ahead of time as part of the submission. Because it does take time. And $1,000, in all honesty, is pennies compared to that $3.8 million R1 that you are going to get. So if you or your institution or your startup funds or places can find $500, $1,000 to give that person as they're putting in their blood, sweat, and toil at 10 o'clock at night to read your grant after they've worked all day and really help you get it where it needs to be competitive, do that for them up front. We do it all the time. Every consultant, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I get 2 reads on the grant, dig up your elbows, wordsmith, add stuff, give me feedback, put your voice into that grant. 2 reads, $500 a piece, $1,000. That's what we give them. Okay?
You find that some consulting agencies, they will write consulting grants, or to pay them if you get paid and you
Yes.
get that.
So that's the other thing is you're going to pay your consultant in the grant to stay part of your team. Paying person as a consultant is merely how the money flows. You're also going to pay co-investigators. Your consultant is like a co-investigator. It's just that they're not an employee of your university, so you're not going to pay them through the university. You're going to write them a check as a consultant. You also can have them, if they're at a different university, they can choose to be paid as a consultant. They can choose to be paid as a co-investigator, in which case you would issue a subcontract to them, pay their university to pay part of their effort. If you're working with people who are really, really successful, like myself, I don't take any more subcontracts off of anything. I do it all as consulting because I'm overcommitted and overfunded as it is at my university, and I'm constantly giving money back to my university. And in this day and age, as you all know, I would rather have that in my pocket for my vacation, right? Because the university isn't going to pay me any more than I'm getting at the moment. So you have to let your consultants sort of tell you that. Some of them will say, yeah, you could give me 5% or whatever. At the end,